Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you did not know, I had Broku and Kaiba on the latest episode of the Clover cast, which is the Black Clover podcast. So if you haven't checked that out yet, make sure you go check that out. And before we begin, let me remind you that this is part 2 to a two-parter video on Patry. So make sure you go watch part 1 because that is 25 minutes long and has a lot of integral information that is important for this particular part. So with that said, my name is Buzzard. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And here we go. Alright, so we're finally here. We're finally at the goddamn devil. Oh man, was this guy like super crazy or what? Like when he was revealed on the pages, I remember going insane, dude. Like reading this entire arc weekly was just an experience that I cannot forget. It was insane. But again, this is a Patry video, so if you want a more in-depth video on the devil himself, like I said, like I've been saying all along, subscribe, like, and I'll make that happen.
Hey, so as I was editing this video, I realized that I went completely off script a lot of times, and while I do make a lot of good points, those points take too long to get made, so I decided that even though these points were really good, and I point out how emotional some of these things are and go off on a lot of tangents that might be cool, it is more important that I stick to the original script because the freestyle podcast type recording I did here is more suitable for the podcast and it dragged the video on for longer than it needed to be. And because of that, I'll be taking over here, and unfortunately this means that you don't get to see my beautiful face for as long as you originally would have, but I think that is a good enough compromise to make because I'm able to bring my thoughts to you in a more cohesive manner. So here we go. The devil had a huge plan that went down the drain because Licht refused to despair and become a dark elf and released all that demonic or negative mana, which made him transform into a demon. Also, oh my god, there are so many theories you can make just based off of that, some of which we have made on the podcast. Again, check that out, link in the description. When the plan the devil made fails, he looks around for other potential 4-leaf level elves, and he realizes that Patry would have become a 4-leaf clover mage. And added on top of that, like I mentioned earlier, he died with an acute hatred for humans and a reverence for Licht. All this played perfectly into the devil's requirements, and he set off the reincarnation spell Nawad Nepesh, along with meticulously calculating when a human with the same body type and facial structure as Licht would be born. Which also leads into an interesting question. We know that William's family was cursed and he had that scar on his face, but could it be because his family in the past had relations with elves and that's why their bloodlines got mixed? Or is it possible that William's mother was an actual elf who was a descendant of all of the people who didn't die during the incident? Because we do see a scene from the anime where we shown 2 elven children, so could that be possibly connected?
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory.
But anyway, we know this, right? We know that the devil is a crazy dude who played Patry and the humans like a fiddle. He knew exactly how to take advantage of humans, and more importantly, Patry. He understood in an instant how to play Patry's emotions and how to make him believe himself as the chosen one. He prepared the perfect path for Patry to walk down, and in the process, Patry had to drag down all the other elves and other humans too, all for the sake of the devil's entertainment. Here is where the big difference between an antagonist and a villain comes into play. At this moment, the devil is purely a villain, whose motivations are purely evil, and the only motivation other than his villainy he has is to retrieve his body, which has nothing to do with the protagonist's or the antagonist's ideologies. In direct comparison, you understand that while getting the elves back into the world, they directly have to take over a bunch of humans, and while again that is similar to the devil, it is only a part of their actual motivation. The actual motivation or goal of Patry is to ensure the erasure of all humans in the Clover Kingdom, especially the royals. Right, so this is in a direct opposition to our protagonists, the citizens, and even some of the royals of the Clover Kingdom. The villain here just wants to watch it all burn, while the antagonists being misled, wants specific people to burn because of a specific action in history, but the antagonists being misled is key here. Their motivations here are flawed, and that's what makes antagonists so much more enjoyable than villains. So far, I have highlighted all of Patry's motivations and mentioned how they're flawed, mistaken, and contradictory. By just looking at Patry's clashing ideologies, contradictory nature, and unwillingness to see his own faults, it's quite obvious how he stacks up as a perfect antagonist. Beyond just those things though, he alters his personality, he blinds himself willingly to the wrongdoings of elves themselves in search of the magic stones. He fails to see how he's hurting humans who aren't royals in order to be able to hurt the royals. He sees the goodness in William, which should prove to him that there are many humans who would not be identical to the people whom he claims betrayed him, and ignores that and blindly hates humans. Even after reincarnating, he places a huge value on four-leaf clover grimoires, even though he saw a human Lumiere using one. But since he believes him to have betrayed the elves, how would that still make a four-leaf clover user one of the chosen ones? On top of just all of that, his whole persona of Licht is so goddamn phony, and once everyone is reincarnated, he just ignores the fact that he was pretending to be Licht, because the elves now know that he isn't Licht. All of them ignore it because, oh, he's just a 15-year-old who wanted to be his hero, but this is a whole grown man who is 25 years old, and he's still not grown out of trying to ape the idea of a person he admires. He was so far off the mark when he was trying to emulate Licht. He would cry for Sally getting hurt 1 second and hate on the bulls for hurting her while ignoring the fact that they were literally kidnapping and draining literal children immediately before that happened. These children are in no way connected to what happened to the elves, and Sally is the perfect example of a human Patry hates, as he himself states later on. But another important point here is when he does point out all of those things that the humans were wrong for doing, isn't he the one who's enabling them to do all of these things? He's actually making sure that these humans are as evil as can be, and he's using that as proof as their natural inclination to be evil. Not to mention his exact words being, "You have no qualms about hurting other people, although you're terribly sensitive to your own pain, and by thoroughly idolizing something you justify your own sins." These statements are so much more applicable to Patry himself, and the fact that he's the one who says these words is irony to the highest degree in Tabata's genius at display. But at the same time, he's been planning this whole reincarnation arc for the last so many years. The way this man is so absolutely stupid while he carried out a plan that took out the entire kingdom speaks to how stupid Julius was.
God damn, was Julius an idiot. Oh, I got a call from nobody, so this is just for a skit. Okay. Yo, hello. Yo, hey man, don't talk about Julius. Oh, we got a separate video coming for that. Whoa, what? A separate video coming for that? Yeah, man, we got a separate Julius video coming for that. So tell them to subscribe and like and shit, right? Yeah, okay, I'm out. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys heard that really bad script that I wrote for this stupid ass goddamn skit. Oh.
Anyway, all of that to say how amazingly written that was. Yes, Patry being stupid while also being brilliant enough to bring a nation to its knees is crazy good writing because he's an antagonist who was being manipulated to an extent to be that level of ignorant. He was a perfect foil for the devil. Patry being so flawed is actually what makes the devil work. Like, think about it. Patry always felt weird. All these flaws that we see in him now would only be flaws and stupidity in writing if the devil actually did not exist. He makes you realize, so Patry was manipulated. Though this doesn't excuse his stupidity as a whole, it gives so much more context as to why he was the way he was. He was easy to manipulate because he was a child when the traumatic event happened, and along with that, his reverence for Licht and a four-leaf clover grimoire, and his pre-existing dislike for humans anyway, were genuine flaws used by the devil to invoke a character who was more interesting and flawed than he originally was. Again, this is just Tabata flexing his writing skills like a god with the whole character of Patry. And I hope that convinced you to understand why I believe Patry is such a great antagonist, if not one of the best of this current generation of weekly Shonen Jump manga. So, at this point, you're like, okay dude, you've made your point. Or not, actually. If you don't think I convinced you, make sure you tell me why in the comments down below, and I'll read them and reply. I do have a lot of personal thoughts on the character and don't think Patry is a perfectly written character by any means, but he for sure is one hell of an antagonist. So, again, at this point you think I'm done, right? Well, that's where you're wrong, because the most important part of any character, the final arc, the redemption and the future of the character, is coming right up with part 5. So, here we go. So finally, we're at the final part of this video. Man, this video took so long to finally make it, and then I'm just like really glad that I'm at this point. So it's all nice and dandy that a character or an antagonist like Patry existed, but like I said in the previous part, he was supremely overshadowed by the word magic devil. It takes actual effort to go and find out how the word magic devil even manipulated Patry, and while I can stand here, or rather sit here, well actually the straw man is actually standing there, so I guess, no, you know what, yeah, I'm standing here, there we go. While I can stand here and say that that's amazing, to the average reader, it really isn't. So, subtle foreshadowing is definitely amazing when used properly. I feel like Bleach faced much of the same issues with regards to subtle foreshadowing, and how the villain's whole shtick, where he planned everything from the beginning, seemed like a convenience excuse to me, and not actually something that made sense. But like Black Clover, if you go back and look for it, the clues definitely exist. In Black Clover, I feel like the same thing happened with the word magic devil's claims, but most importantly, it's the same thing for most, if not all, plot twists in Black Clover. To this day, I find people who don't understand how Licht and Patry are different characters, which, I mean, that's on them, because just open your eyes. God damn, but that's a loose example for the problem here. Tabata's explicit subtlety, as I put it in my previous Discrimination in Black Clover video, which you can check out right up there, is amazing for when you go and reread a couple of times for an analysis video. But for a weekly reading experience for a normal viewer, I think that subtlety is far too subtle. Exposition is so important for a fantasy series like Black Clover, which I feel is quite lacking in this show, but that's an entirely different topic for a different day. Anyway, my point was that Patry could have been a much more memorable character with just a little bit more exposition. The Elven flashback, which admittedly was told from a human's point of view, should have focused a lot more on the elves and the relationships between them itself. This is also where I would invoke the William and Patry example. The relationship between these two characters is not told to us, but visually expressed. We can see Patry bending down and placing William's mask on the ground, and we can see him gently placing the grimoire, and both of these scenes just emphasize how truly Patry cares for William. But when these elves just tell us that, oh yeah, we were brothers, or they hug each other, and that's pretty much it, and you don't even know the names of these people. I mean, for God's sake, Gauche's elf was foreshadowed since the Gauche dungeon arc, but it was never explicitly stated how much Gauche's elf cared for all the other elves, and it was never a real thing. We never understood them as actual characters. They were just these caricatures of something that Tabata wanted to instill in that particular scene, which I feel like was not done really well. In my opinion, there were at least 3 victims who fell really hard, even though they were important characters, to this particular problem. 2 of them would be Fana and Veto from the Third Eye, and the third one would obviously be Tetia. The Third Eye were so shallow as characters in my opinion, because Fana finally got a personality after being reincarnated, and Veto lost whatever personality he had after being reincarnated, and even though before he was reincarnated, he was just this walking, talking Zetsubo, or despair, dude. It was never anything deeper than that, which is really sad, I feel, because they had their own arcs, and to have had introspectiveness among these characters would have been amazing to see, but alas, we never got that. And the most important character,
Tetia, who was the catalyst for everything that happened during the Elf Saga, was just a mimosa-looking character, and beyond that, we never really understood anything about her, which is, like I said before, quite sad. But I digress. So let's actually discuss the chapter or segment, Patry's redemption and future. Now, I personally don't think he has redeemed himself at all, which is why this segment is titled Redemption and Future, because they go hand in hand. But Tabata has already laid seeds for this with Asta and, most importantly, Radis. Asta did what all good shonen MCs do best. He spoke to the antagonist and convinced him to not do whatever he was doing. Fortunately, Patry was not a villain and was an antagonist whose real goals were just misguided, and finally he was on the same side as the protagonists. So this wasn't a bad decision, because having been such an important figure so far, to have just thrown him away would have been literally the worst narrative decision to make. So I'm thankful that Tabata went this route. So, like I said before, Tabata chose Asta, the MC, to take care of giving Patry his character moment, which is perfect because the protagonist of the protagonists is having his talk, finally, with the leader of the antagonists, thus fulfilling the requirement of the plot role. It was really cool to see Asta bite his tongue and get this 15-year-old, who was actually a 25-year-old, out of the rut he was stuck inside. Asta absolutely hated this guy, saw him killing Julius on the way inside, but still found himself convincing him to not give up and fight for what he knows is right. God, you gotta love some of that classic shonen cliche. And before you lose your cool, I do not mean cliche in a negative way at all. Cliches are cliches for a reason. It's because they work. And honestly, they're why you keep coming back to shonen. It's some good shit, yo. Anyway, once Asta makes him see the error of his ways, Patry comes out of his despair and is now a half-dark elf? By the way, when he gets his soul into the clone body, this eye still remains as well. I don't really understand that. If you do, drop a comment down below and educate me. It just seems really weird, which is why I'm not really addressing the whole dark elf aspect of it all when he despaired. I don't think there's too much characterization going on there. He's just trapped by all the bad things he's done and is in denial, and Asta breaks him out of it, and that's pretty much it. So, once that happens, Patry goes from being in denial to accepting the fact that he will feel guilt, which is an amazing character moment for Patry, all thanks to Asta. So, as the closing arc to Patry's character, obviously we have the two people most important to him present to close off his character, Licht and William. And can I just say that Licht and Patry's scene is one of the most emotional scenes in all of Black Clover personally. To me, it's up there with Zora's backstory. Licht finally allows Patry to feel everything he was feeling. Licht's words invoked the immeasurable guilt he felt, plus the final comfort that he had yearned for since the beginning. Yes, the outlying goal was the destruction of the Clover Kingdom humans, but all of that was in service of finally getting to see Licht once more. So, beyond that, to see someone acknowledge all his effort even though it caused so many problems overall and was in vain, was just so well done. It gives you a genuine idea of the kind of person Licht was. I mean, it was done so well that I could even understand why Patry wanted to be him. This was such a great moment for Patry, which was followed up by the end of the fight with his amazing moment with William, like I mentioned before in the first part. Now, while this was a controversial decision for most people, I think it was pretty great that Radis brought him back. Like he himself says, his atonement is just beginning. His redemption has not been earned yet. He didn't do anything of major importance in the fight against the devil. It was ultimately finished off by Asta and the arcane stage, Yami. Normally, this is where you bring back the flawed character for redemption and have him die at the end while he sacrifices himself to defeat the villain. But I think Tabata was setting up Yami as the arcane stage dark magic user for the following saga, and of course you need the main character to give the ending blow to the main villain of that saga, and ultimately Patry could not get his moment. Now this here leads to my thoughts on Patry's future. Clearly, he's still able to use that demon light magic which affects the devils, and this makes him an arcane stage. So, for the next saga, I think he should play a huge role in defeating a devil along with other characters, at the very least, to genuinely explain his revival as something useful. If not, it just seems like he was revived for no reason, which would not be the best writing. But I am confident that there's a reason why Tabata did not use Patry for the end. Like I said, his demon light magic being able to affect devils is a very big deal because of how powerful he is regardless, and I think Tabata has earned enough trust from writing the Elf Saga's amazing plot twists as a whole for me to not worry about where he's going to take Patry's character. Anyway guys, those are my thoughts on Patry. I hope I helped you understand what makes him such a great character. I hope people stop overlooking him when it comes to discussions on well-written antagonists, because he really is really well-written. But more importantly, everybody, there are so many ideas I have for videos, so I'll definitely be making these videos when I go really in detail and give you a consolidated video on my thoughts based on events that I pull up from the anime. But if you're more interested in that weekly Black Clover content, make sure you go check out the Black Clover podcast, the Clovercast. The link will be in the description. I recently had Broku and the Kaiba Man on the podcast, and we discussed the latest manga arc, the Spade Invasion arc. So if you're interested in that video, make sure you go check out the link in the description. But if you are interested in more of these analytical content type videos, check out my Discrimination in Black Clover video, which link will also be in the description. But apart from this, which video would you like to see from me? Do you want a video on the devil, or do you want to talk about Julius, or do you want something on William or Noel? There's a lot of things that I can talk about in Black Clover, but with that said, if you leave a like and comment on whatever you want, I'll know that there's excitement for that. And if you can subscribe to the channel, that'd be really awesome. But yeah guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I've been Buzzard, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.